Welcome to the Starfish Storytellers, the podcast that makes a difference one story at a time by bringing storytelling to life.
One of the clients that I worked with was a summer day camp, and they had been messaging about their lake literally for decades, which was understandable because their lake is 50 acres. So it is literal, and it's a 350 acre property with a 50-acre lake in the midst of it, and all the activities are around the lake. So you can understand, and this is the part where I think people get a little confused about what's meaningful to me versus what's meaningful to my clients. And they had hit a wall. They've been around since the 1950s. They used to be the gold standard of a summer day camp. This is not overnight camp, so I just want to make sure to clarify that. But here's what happened. So the first thing we did is I helped them put together an online survey, and we asked a series of questions. And two of the questions had to do, one was around their messaging, and the other was around their logo. And they got an amazing response. 100 families responded to this online survey, which is, by the way, what you want. 100 is a really good indicator because it gives you enough data. And so one of the questions was, what's the number one reason you send your kids there? And out of 100 people, only 2 people mentioned the lake, which I thought was really incredible because here's literally decades, right? They had literally messaged. And then the other thing we asked them is, what do you think about the logo? And out of 100 people, I can't even tell you, there were people literally, I don't know how many people said, what logo? They literally didn't even see the logo. And that really ties into the fact that we see the things that are important to us, and the things that are not, they really become invisible. And so it turned out that what parents actually cared about was that their kids had fun, they took risks, and they gained confidence in themselves. And it was all about the activities in and around the lake, but the lake was not the story. The story was their child growing up, their child becoming more independent and a strong and confident swimmer. They actually have one of the best swim programs in Northeast Pennsylvania, which is where they are. So as a result of all of this, and there was a lot more work. I'm giving you the really shortened version, but I interviewed everyone in the staff and the director, and I read, by the way, dozens of letters from parents. It was really quite something. And at the end of the day, they're the core of what they do, and their new tagline reflects this, is that this is the place where small kids do big things. And then the logo was also changed, and instead of a boat in the middle of the lake, it's now a child, and it's from the back. You see the back of the child with their arms up, and we do it purposely so you can't tell if it's a boy or a girl. And they've got their arms up, and they're about to jump. And they could be jumping from the edge of a pool, or the edge of a boat, or the edge of the floating park, that's the inflatable water park that is also a feature. And so it's really, what was really interesting about that is that it goes back to this idea that you can't read the label from inside the jar. You get too close to it. And then what happens typically, the reason for a rebrand is that typically you hit a wall. And that wall is you're no longer able to attract as many kids. And in their case, they still had open spots in July. After the rebrand, they had a wait list in March.
Hello, my name is Liana Henry, and welcome to the Starfish Storytellers. I'm the CEO of the Black Dog Group and your host. I'm passionate about storytelling and on a mission to raise up the next generation of storytellers. We're called the Starfish Storytellers after the moral of the Starfish story, which centers on the power of one. Because no matter how big the challenge, every action matters. One step, one starfish, and one story at a time. Every episode will welcome a new storyteller who will inspire and connect with you. So thanks for tuning in. Now let's get started. Today's episode is Standing Out in a 5-Second World, Brand Clarity and the Entrepreneur's Story. And with me today is Orly Zeewy. Orly is the author of Ready Launch Brand, the lean marketing guide for startups, which was endorsed by marketing legend Seth Godin and became the #1 new business release on Amazon in April 2021. She's also the author of the upcoming book, Why Not Me? The Female Guide for Entrepreneurship, which will be published in 2026. Orly works with entrepreneurs and organizations to help them clarify their brand messaging and stand out in what she calls a 5-second world, where businesses only have moments to capture attention and communicate value. She has spoken at leading universities like Wharton, Rutgers, and Princeton, and her work focuses on helping businesses turn fuzzy messaging into clear, compelling stories that connect with the right audience. So welcome to the Starfish Storytellers. Orly, we're so happy you're here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Liana. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So, Orly, we kick off every episode by having our guests introduce themselves in their own words. Would you share a little bit about your journey and the work that you do today?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll give you a little bit of background. I actually started as a fine artist, but I quickly discovered that I prefer solving other people's creative problems rather than my own. And that led me to earn a degree in graphic design from one of the top design schools in the country. I then founded and led an award-winning design and marketing communications firm for 14 years. Our logos were published in leading design journals, and our brochure, our promotional brochure, was featured in a 2-page spread in guerrilla marketing. So we were very successful. And then, of course, life happens. I had 2 children. Everything went to digital while that was happening. And when I went back into work full time, what I realized is that I really did not want to become a web designer. I wanted to use all that knowledge. By then, I'd had 20 years of experience in design and marketing communications. I was a very strong designer, and using those skills in a different way really appealed to me. So at that point, I actually wrote myself a mission statement to determine what my next career move would be. And I opened a consulting practice. At that time, it was focused on brand identity because that was a leftover from my design and marketing communications firm. And then I had an aha moment, which was when I watched the TED Talk of Simon Sinek and the Golden Circle. And that whole idea about the why and speaking from outside in versus inside out, and the different companies who did that and how they could shift perception, and how important it was to start with what mattered to your clients and not what matters to you. That's when I realized that what I really wanted to do was to help companies find their why. So in 2010, I stopped doing brand identity work and I shifted into brand strategy. And then when my eldest went off to college, I went back to school and earn an MBA. And I did that so I could also help startups get clear on their business models, in addition to developing their messaging and improve their user experience. So my focus really moved from doing campaigns, marketing campaigns, which is what we were doing as a marketing communications firm, to focusing more on how do I show up online? How do I talk about my brand? Who is my client? All the things that are part of building a sustainable brand. And then I decided to focus on startups because the best time to clarify your why is at the start of your business. And then that led me to writing my book. So after I got my MBA, I had been thinking about writing a book for a while. And just to put the book in perspective, my father was actually a struggling entrepreneur. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs on my father's side. And my father was never a successful entrepreneur, and that really had a huge impact on our family and on me as a child. And by that point, when I was writing the book, I learned that by year 5, 90% of startups fail. And by the way, the #1 reason that they fail is no market need. And that's really my piece. This is why I focused there, because there's no market need because you don't really know who you are, you don't really know who needs it, and you don't really know how your solution is aligned with the problem that you're solving. And so that really became the North Star for me, is to focus on helping startups beat the odds. And I will say that, just coming full circle here, my dad, who of course has long since retired, when my book came out, I sent him a signed copy, and he said he wished he'd had my book when he had his business.
That's great. That's great. Again, thank you for your story. I think what stood out was really looking at the branding and really looking at the clarity in that branding. And I think that's your mission now. We know that in a crowded marketplace, businesses are competing for attention, and brands that rise above the noise are going to be the ones that understand who they are, who they serve, and why they matter. Storytelling plays a big part in that. I think it's not just like you said, it's not just about logos and taglines. People need to understand your purpose and your values and the problem you're solving for them. And I think brand can communicate that clearly. It's going to be easier for their customers to recognize and trust and remember them. I think you nailed it. I think it's a 5-second world. Clarity becomes really powerful.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need to also understand that the context is really important here, which is that we are being literally overwhelmed by tens of thousands of daily marketing messages, and they're coming at us 24/7. And what I have learned through working with hundreds of founders is that it's never about being louder. Louder doesn't get you noticed. It's about being clearer.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've built your foundation, your mantra on that 5-second world reality that we live in. I know when I got my master's degree, I remember having a professor in a class talk about it's a Google world, and we all have the attention span of a goldfish, which is about 7 seconds. That's the reality. Attention spans are short. When you're working with businesses and they're trying to stand out, what are they getting wrong? What should they be focusing on primarily?
That is such a great question, because too often I think businesses, especially at the beginning, they try to do everything. And the first thing they try to do is design a logo, which I just find that so odd, because a logo is shorthand for your brand and you haven't yet built your brand. Don't even do that. Just focus more on what the name is, because the name is important. But the goal is to figure out, if you think of it this way, a logo is like the bow on the package. And the bow has to indicate what's in the package. And I always think of Tiffany's. They actually train their people to tie the bow in such a way that when the customer opens it, they can undo the bow in one move. Yeah, I know. It's amazing. But the point here is that what's important is figure out what's inside the box first, because the logo needs to represent what's in the box. It is not the story. It is like an indicator. Oh, I get there's something going on here that it's giving me a hint of what's coming. And so that's the first thing I see. The other thing is, stop trying to appeal to everybody. Because especially in the beginning, oh, everybody's a client. Everybody needs what I do. No, they really don't. And even if they did, do you have 100,000 a year minimum to market to all those people? No. So the advice I always give them is pick one, and pick the one that you actually want to work with. So the first thing I do when I work with my clients, we talk about who's your ideal client and why are they your ideal client. A lot of times I think businesses, because they jump in with both feet, and the goal of course is at this point, I just want to keep the lights on. So they take work from everywhere, which is fine, but there is an ideal client that fits your process. And that's the part in the story that I hear from my clients. What I love the most is hearing the way their process solves a specific problem they've identified that their ideal client struggles with. If you don't do that, you become a solution looking for a problem. And if you try to speak to everyone, you connect with no one.
I know you said you work with startups, and I know for us, it's been each year that passes is a refining that happens, right? So yes, when we left the gate, it was, yes, we're going to do it all. And then as time has passed, that value prop has evolved. And I'm all for work to your strengths. Don't do things that you're not. I think that walk the line between, yes, I can do these things and imposter syndrome. And as an entrepreneur, there are days when I am building the parachute on the way down because I see the opportunity and I see what's possible. But you're right. I think it's like the clarity that you're helping your clients with is really just understanding who you are. And I think your story also really goes back to I know I think people want what I have, but did I ask them? And and what do they really need? And being willing to work and and provide the things that people need. So,
I've noticed that market research is something that doesn't happen usually till later. And honestly, if you can do it sooner, it will save you so much trouble. And I did want to just say that although I started working specifically with startups, I'm now really working more with founders and entrepreneurs in early stage businesses, but not necessarily at the very beginning. And the reason for that, and I did want to clarify that, is at the very beginning, they're not even ready for this. As much as I would love to help people at the very beginning, as long as it's within those first 5 years, because by year five, 90% are going to fail. If I can get to them before that, I can really help them.
yeah.
And I think what typically happens is by year three, the business hits a wall because you run out of referrals. At that point, all of a sudden you realize, oh, we're not getting as much business. Things have really shifted. And also by then, you've also had your first spurt of growing pains, and you go, we really don't do this. We really are much better in this. And that takes time. And I always say, don't worry about it. You'll figure this out. Founders, by their very nature, they're very passionate and they want to help people and they want to do something that's going to make a difference. But there's nothing wrong with pivoting when it needs to happen.
And I think you're right. And I think the market research that you might do out of the gate is going to be very different, I think, than the
Yeah.
market research you're doing at year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because the landscape is, I think, always evolving as well. When we kicked off our business, we were coming out of the tech layoffs of 23. And so it was one vision. Now we're in a very different place. And so we're seeing, even though the core is the same, execution, and that's what I've built my business on, but I'm finding that the needs of my clients are just a little bit different. And so that service has to pivot too. And I think that I recently got an email from you talking about core fundamentals of a brand, where you talked about things like purpose and audience and competitive advantage and visual identity. And so, can you talk a little bit about why those fundamentals are important and what happens when businesses skip over that foundational work?
Well, first of all, when you skip over it, it comes back. You can't
Yes, it
really
does.
truly get away from it. So you can do it now, you can do it later, or you can learn about it after you close your business. Honest to goodness, if it really boils down to who am I, who do I help, and what do they get from working with me? And I know that sounds really simplistic, but I'll tell you, it's some of the hardest work because you have to leave somebody out and you have to be willing to say, okay, I can do these 20 things, but really it's these three things that are not just things I like to do, want to do, and good at doing, but those are also the three things that are aligned with the problem I'm solving for a client. So there's this constant need to look at alignment. Is my why aligned with my client's need, desire? Is it actually understandable by them? Because if nobody understands it, they're not going to buy it. And like I said, the number one reason that startups fail is no market need. By the way, the number two reason, I figured I would tell this to the listeners, number two reason is the wrong team. And the number three reason, which you'll not be surprised to hear, is that they run out of money.
Yeah, that's usually what I hear is a lot of
Yeah.
businesses don't make it because of for financial reasons.
But they do that because they haven't done, so it's a catch 22, right? So if you don't know who you serve and you're not having aligned what you do with somebody's actual need that you can charge for. That's the other. So you have to also, it's not enough that people, because everybody will tell you, oh, what a great idea. That's very nice. But will they actually pay money for it? That's very different. And so sometimes I think, especially as women, we have a tendency to downplay our zone of genius, and we think it comes so easily to us. It can't be that important or that valuable. And that's asking the completely wrong question, right? Because you really need to be looking at what's the problem solving, and is how am I transforming the life of the people who are going through that process. So the clearer you are and the more streamlined you are, the easier it'll be for people to find you. Forget remembering you, right? That takes a long time. But if you can get clear on your core, who am I, who needs it, and what did they get from working with you, and you understand that why at a really core level, and then you message around that consistently across platforms, on your website, every time your elevator pitch, all the pieces where you interact with potential clients, eventually, and especially because of the algorithms on social media, eventually that's what you become known for.
Yeah, yeah. Getting into maybe talking a little bit more about the fuzzy messaging, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
And then I want to get into female entrepreneurship for sure. I met you at a Smarketing meeting, Smarketing Connect meeting, a networking meeting. And I remember that day you did talk about turning fuzzy messaging into gold, into LinkedIn gold. And you were talking about LinkedIn profiles. And I love that. I think businesses struggle with explaining what they do. And what we've been talking about. So can you talk a little bit more about fuzzy messaging? And when a company comes to you, their messaging isn't really clear. How do you help them refine that into something that's simple and compelling? I find even for us, I think it's challenging.
It is definitely challenging. Look, it took me a long time to even be able, and I'm not even the person who said I'm a facilitator of light bulb moments. That was a colleague of mine, a friend and colleague who'd known me for a long time. And she says, Orly, I know what you do. You're a facilitator of light bulb moments. And people would tell me, like, oh, I just had this aha experience. And the thing is that we already know the answer. The problem is that we get caught up in what we think we should be doing, or we have this idea of what people want, and those two things don't necessarily align. One of the things I always tell my clients to do is go ask the people who worked with you. Ask them. You can do a Google form. It takes you no time at all. You ask 3 questions, three things that you get from working with. Even getting that kind of data, which I've done, by the way, because we tend to get really caught up in a lot of minutia. And really, if you can step back and ask your clients for feedback, and even if you don't have clients, ask people who you think are going to be good clients for you. What are they looking for in a leadership coach or whatever it is? And so what you really want is to get clarity for yourself first, and then you're able to really communicate it. I would say that the prime example of where the sort of things go off the rails is your homepage. I would say websites are number one. I could talk about LinkedIn too, but for me, the website. So I land on your homepage, and here's what happens. I am overwhelmed with stuff. You're talking about all these things I don't care about. You've got pop-ups and, oh, sign up for my newsletter, and here, download this. I know nothing about you. Most people, and I'm just talking about people who just happen on your website. Now, yeah, if you send somebody to your website and they already know something about you, but even then, it feels very intrusive to have all these things popping up at me. And in fact, there's only 2 things that I want to know when I land on your homepage. Why am I here, and why should I care? That's it. Why am I here? Why should I care? And you need to, and this is why we go back to, if you understand who you serve and the transformation you provide, start there. Yeah. Start with the outcome. People get really stuck on the what and the how, and what on the how and how is all about you. What I do, how I do it, that's your why. That's your information, but that doesn't help me, right? Because we're not working together yet. So what I need to know in the beginning is, what am I going to get? And so there's 2 things that happen when you start from that place. First of all, It shows that you are truly in the business of serving, not selling. It also shows that you get my pain because you've identified a specific client with a specific problem. And then the language is all around how you help them. And that's very powerful when you tell a story for a client who has struggled with something that I can relate to. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, yeah, I can see that. And of course, testimonials, big fan of testimonials. And I'm always surprised when people don't use them because there's nothing better than having somebody you worked with tell other people about their experience with you.
Yeah, I hear you with the webpage and the website. And I know now you're saying it, I'm like, yeah, we really have to update ours. But I noticed lately, it'd be interesting to just get your take on this. I noticed lately, I'm a marketer and marketers are a dozen. So you have to have a differentiator. So my differentiator is storytelling. But storytelling is not a pillar, it's the thread. It needs to be the thread. And the way that I laid out my website, I laid it out as a pillar. So I know that needs to change because that needs to be the thread that runs through everything we do. One of the things that I've noticed lately, and I detest this because I'm a content person and I'm all about authentic content, is people are really leading into the over salesy language. I'm noticing this a lot. I'm noticing it a lot with people's like Zoom backgrounds. I'm noticing it a lot with landing on somebody's webpage, like you said, just having these like pop-ups that are trying to sell me something. And I find that isn't going to, you're not going to get rewarded by the Google algorithm necessarily for that anyway. The algorithm is looking for quality content anyway. But more than the algorithm, your client, your potential client, your lead, your prospect, they need to know who you are and what you do. I agree. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, I'm like, yeah, I definitely try to talk about the pain points, but I definitely have used the website to tell our story. And I think what you're saying is, if I understand it correctly, is there's a place and a time for that, and there's a way and there's a place to limit some of that, but that it really does need to address the pain point. How do you address the pain point without getting so salesy?
So let me say that for me, I've leaned into using Times Square as the image. And images, by the way, people are really misusing images. It's not just, hey, fun people or stock photos, or the image has to also be aligned with your message. So my message is all about cutting through the noise. And it turns out that Times Square is literally it's recognized as one of the most busiest places for it's like the go-to for advertising, right?
The
It's like
epitome of noise, yes.
it's the epitome of noise. In fact, if you were standing in the middle of Times Square, you'd be surrounded by close to 300 buy me messages. And nobody sees all of those. You maybe notice like maybe 6 or 7, and maybe you remember a couple of them. No way you could remember 300 messages. So for me, and I've been using that image for about 10 years now. And the reason I like it is because it speaks to the whole noise thing without me even saying anything. Because it is literally as if each of us is standing in the middle of Times Square trying to be heard. It is the perfect storm of advertising. That is what Times Square is known for. And now they have those digital ad things. Oh my God. And they've got, I don't even know how many they have on each of those. And I forget how many they have, maybe 7 or 8 or something. But so the idea is that if you want to talk about clarity, you need to be in a noisy place. And then you need to think about, okay, how am I heard? And repetition, a simple message that cuts through the noise that you repeat over and over again on every platform, on your website, social media. Your elevator pitch should also have that so that you become known as that person. So when people think, oh, I need someone to help me cut through the noise, I need someone to make my fuzzy clear, hopefully they're thinking of me because they've seen me also post on LinkedIn. So getting back to LinkedIn, because you had mentioned it, what you post is really important because what you want is engagement. So the name of the game now is all about engagement. So on LinkedIn, it's about keeping people scrolling on your profile. And where the 5-second piece comes from, so at the top of your profile, people spend no more than 7 seconds, and on average, it's more like 5 seconds. On your homepage, people spend on average 6 seconds before they make a go, no go decision. So you only have a few seconds. Why waste them on things that have already been shown that are not going to increase engagement? Because on your homepage, you want people to click, which is why you don't want to tell them everything up front. What's the reason to click if you tell me everything up front? I want to discover myself. I think we forget that we're talking to humans, and humans love stories, and humans learn through engagement. So you want to pique someone's interest so that they want to keep clicking and they want to keep scrolling.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. You've already written a book. You've written more than one book, but you have an upcoming book. Why Not Me? The Female Guide for Entrepreneurship is coming out this year.
Yes, I'm actually working with a copy editor right now on the manuscript. So that's just, it's close. It's very close.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you. And when I say the title, it's funny because I always say, why not me? Because the emphasis on the not it's so meaningful to women founders, because every one of the 44 women I interviewed for the book has struggled with that. Why me? The why me piece.
And what have they said when they say that they're struggling with that? What have they said?
It's funny because the title actually came from one of my interviews. And the woman I interviewed, who lives in Northern Ireland, she's now a top UK LinkedIn voice in the UK. And when she was first starting, and this is a little side note here, which is more than half the women I interviewed are also moms. And so their stories also have to do with what it's like to be a mompreneur, which I was myself, so I can really relate to that. As far as I know, there are not a lot of books that actually talk about that or show what that looks like, or even all you have to do is hear their story. So here's this woman in Northern Ireland. She had a full-time job. She was launching this new business, and she had 3 children under the age of, I want to say 9 or 8. And she was doing all of this, right? And so she kept saying to herself, like, why me? Who am I, like, to do all this? And then finally she said, why not me? Why not me? And I can really relate to that, because with my first book, I spent a lot of time second guessing myself. Who am I to write this book? So, hello, you've worked with all these founders. You come from a line of entrepreneurs. You've been an entrepreneur your entire career. You've had things published in journals, and you've been interviewed. So at a certain point, we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace. And so now, of course, this woman that I mentioned, she's met the king, she's been to 10 Downing Street. The confidence, it's you fake it till you make it, but you're not really faking it. You actually know what you're talking about. It's just that it takes time for it to materialize. And so we have to be patient with ourselves, which I think women founders have a hard time with, because we're always saying, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. And I have wiped it away out of my vocabulary. Every time I hear it, I'm like, nope, nope, no. You're here in this moment, and you are doing the best you can. And everything that you've learned up till now has brought you to this point, which brings me to failure. And failure is one of those things that, entrepreneurs, no entrepreneur has ever been successful 100% of the time. That's just not how it works. Mistakes, failures, pivoting, all of that's all part of the entrepreneurial journey. And if you forget that, you focus, and again, as women, we're really good at beating ourselves up and saying, oh, I should have done this, and oh, how could I have done that? The reality is that failure teaches us something. And when we get stuck on the failure instead of the lesson, we literally are paralyzed and we can't move forward. So the idea is to look at failure as a teacher. And that phrase, fail often, fail fast, there's a reason why that has legs, because that's the whole point of failure. It's not to stay in the failed place, but to say, okay, let me step back and look at this. Some of the greatest stories come out of failure. In fact, can I share one of those from my book?
That would be great. That would be great.
It's such a fun story. So we've all heard of bubble wrap, right?
Oh, yes.
But
it's a great fun.
Yes, it is. And it's now ubiquitous that, like Kleenex, bubble wrap is like its own, right?
Yeah.
But I would guess, I won't bet, but I would guess that you don't know what bubble wrap was originally intended for.
I don't. You mean it
Oh,
wasn't for packing your dishes?
nope, nope, no, it wasn't. That is such a fun story. So anyhow, so this is the 1950s in the US, and an inventor and an engineer, one was Swiss, one was American. They came up with this idea. They took two pieces of plastic, they put air, I don't know exactly, I'm not an inventor, so I don't know, but they came up with this thing and they're like, wow, this is so cool. And this is the 1950s in the US, and wallpaper was all the rage. And they thought, what a great idea. Wallpaper. We're gonna put this on the walls, right? Because textured wallpaper, this is such a great idea. And you think about, I know this is two men who do not have children, because think about the living room walls covered in bubble wrap with four children under the age of 10. The mind literally
Oh yeah.
can't even comprehend.
Uh,
So, needless to say, they got a resounding no. They're like, you got to be kidding, get out of here. We're not doing this. And so, here was a complete and total failure. They completely failed in their original idea. And what they did was, what they could have done is said, oh, well, we failed. Let's go back to our full time jobs or whatever they were doing. Instead, they said, okay, it didn't work for this. Let's look at some other markets. What other industries? And they actually looked at gardening supply. I think it was like gardening centers or anyway, eventually they landed on packaging. And the company was just bought for billions of dollars. Here's the thing, here's a lesson that you can take from bubble wrap. Oh, and by the way, I did find a picture of bubble wrap covering the walls of a living room, and it is hysterical. This is the difference between an inventor and an entrepreneur. An inventor
yes.
falls in love with their invention. An
Mhm.
entrepreneur looks to see how can I turn this into a business and
Mm.
makes the adjustments for that to happen.
Mm.
And inventors, they get so close to this that they can't let it go, even when all the data is pretty clear that nobody's going to buy this. So that's just one of my favorite stories in the book. But and the failure is only in the failure to identify the right market, which goes
Mhm.
back to what I was saying before. What do we do? Who do we serve? And what what do they get? What is the transformation? In this case, they transformed the entire industry. People were using newspaper before then. So it wasn't a failure in the big picture. In the moment, it was a failure. So when I say, that's why I say that failure is a great teacher. And if you're smart and willing to let go of your own ego and to say, oh, that didn't work, but let me see, maybe there's another industry, there's another application that would work.
I think that goes back to a couple of different things that we were talking about. I think, first of all, I think you mentioned lessons learned. And I know as an entrepreneur, as a female entrepreneur, I can get into that place of, oh, I messed up, and then want to focus on that. And what I'm learning is fine if you want to go in your bathroom and stomp your feet and shake your
Mhm.
head, but when you get in front of your client, it's about lessons learned.
Yes.
It's about transparency. It's about areas of improvement and being able to do a goodwill, take a chance on some goodwill and make a change and do something for your client. Don't charge them for something that you messed up on or something like that, because it just shows, yeah, I'm not, like you said, as an entrepreneur, I'm not going to get it right 100% of the time. I try, but there's going to be moments when I'm going to have to step up and say, hey, this is an area where I didn't meet that requirement. I've had a couple of recent cases where that was the case, and my client really appreciated that. And I suspect that we'll be called back with projects that we've wrapped on. So I think staying in that place of lessons learned is really important instead of focusing on making a mistake. And I think you're talking about brands' impact and where's the impact. And just going back to that bubble wrap story, they pivoted. And sometimes I don't even know that it's a mistake so much as, like we said earlier, refinement. The longer I'm doing this, the more I learn, the more I know, we refine it. And
In their case, they were smart in that they went to who they thought that was their, and this is really an important point because they could have just gone ahead and done all this, spend however much money to create a prototype. Instead, they had the original prototype, the MVP was very rough, let me tell you. But
Mm.
anyway, they could have actually created the product and gotten rolls of it made and then gone to interior designers, and they would have lost a lot of money. So it's also about being willing to go to the source thinking, okay, if I've identified this as a potential target market, let me go to them. Let me go talk to them. Let me see if they would be willing to buy this. So when they got the resounding no, they took that as, okay, that's the wrong client. And I think that as entrepreneurs, we need to do this more often. If something doesn't work, the question then needs to be, okay, what do I need to do to make it work? Am I asking the wrong question? Am I focused on the wrong client? Am I offering the wrong product, the wrong service? Is there a way that I can tailor it to this particular client? So it's like you're constantly in conversation with your clients and with what's going on outside of your head, right? Everything does not exist inside of our head. We do not know everything. And I think sometimes, especially as women founders, for some reason, we have this idea that asking for help, that it somehow says that we don't know anything. And in fact, it only shows that you don't know everything. That's not the same thing. And by the way, people love to be asked for their opinions. I think the more you can get like an advisory board or coaches or people who will tell it to you the way they'll tell it to you in a real way. Because think of all the money that you could lose if you go after the wrong thing in the wrong way for the wrong people at the wrong time. There's so many factors, and especially now, it's so much more complicated, and you can really lose your shirt if you're not.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. We had a instance where we were going to take the business in a different direction and we had to make a big investment to be able to present ourselves in a certain way. And after 8 months of chasing things that were getting us nothing, it was time to take a step back. And once we rejiggered everything back to where are our core strengths, we started seeing business again. And it was like, okay. So
Go back to the well and
yeah.
figure out, that's the summer day camp that I mentioned. It was going back to their core value. It wasn't about chasing whatever the next thing was. And I think sometimes we get stuck in that loop of, oh, other people are doing this. That must be the way to go. And other people are not you. That's why I say if you can really get clear on your brand core value and you understand what you're really doing and what you're about and why it matters, then you can stay true to that instead of constantly chasing. There's always going to be another shiny object.
And I think not getting caught up in shiny object syndrome, I think as an entrepreneur is a challenge.
For sure.
But I also think it's all about, I always say, keep the main thing the main thing. What's the one thing that you know you do well?
Right.
And it may not be sexy, like it may not be the most glamorous thing, but if you're really good at it, they will come. You know, if you build it, they will come. And I'm starting to see that too as we refine year after year. This is what works.
And of course, the reality is that things are going to shift around you. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's always a good idea just to get a read on what's happening. And I'm thinking about when I work with people on their LinkedIn profile, a lot of times I work with people who are doing a pivot from a full-time job to starting their business. And what happens is that then they also start to worry about, I've done this in this way for all these years. So it's also about helping them see how those skills can be transferable. You're just shifting the focus a little bit. You're shifting their purpose, but you're still using those skills. They're not dead. They're not useless.
No, you're right. It can, they are transferable. You just have to be, I think, realistic about
Realistic
that.
and also be willing to let go.
Yeah, great point. Orly, I could keep talking and this podcast could go on for hours, but that is all the time we have for today. I just want to thank you so much for joining us and reminding
My
us that
pleasure.
in a noisy world, clarity matters. And I think when you said businesses understand their purpose and their audience and their story, they're not going to just attract attention, but they're going to build connection and trust and lasting impact. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And to our listeners, Whether you've first heard us locally through BTV studios in Bedford, Massachusetts, or you're tuning in from across the globe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon Podcasts, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time. Happy storytelling!